As man breeds and takes food for nourishment, and as he grows old and weary from work, so does the land he owns. The rice yield from this tiny farm was a little less each year. Down through the years, the centuries, these few acres meant life itself to the men who worked it, and now to Kandan and his family, who are of this time. But the once productive soil was worn out and undernourished. Too much had been taken from it, too little put back in, and the soil was starving a little more with each harvest. The story of Kandan's land is repeated on farms in all parts of India. It is the tragic story of rich land worked too hard for too long a time, of land drained of its nitrogen content on which the growing things feed, and drained too of organic matter, the humus by which the earth drinks and breathes and nourishes itself. But these tired lands of India are not hopelessly worn out, nor is the land of Kandan and his neighbors. Under the central and states government's new community development program, recently put into operation with technical assistance from the United States, renewal of the soil by the use of fertilizers is a vital part of the campaign to grow more food, a vital part of the effort to achieve self-sufficiency for India under the 5-year plan. The district in which Kandan lived was studied by agricultural experts seeking ways to increase paddy crops. And then a trained agricultural inspector named Sivaraman made laboratory tests of the soil to determine what it needed. Soon after, as Kandan and his neighbors were threshing the grain from their scanty harvest, he came to them with a message of hope, a message which will soon be brought to thousands of Indian villages under the new program. Sivaraman offered to aid the villagers in restoring their lands to good health and fertility. He began his work at once. In Kandan's field, he looked at the soil and he looked at the poor rice, and said that the things which the soil lacked, nitrogen and humus, could be found right in the village. The plant foods which nourish the rice, just as the rice nourishes you, are in the leaves of the trees over there, and they are in the excretions of your bullocks. Those foods are in all the refuse of your village. Then he showed them one thing more. Those foods are also in the green manure crop which grows from the seed, he said. I shall stay with you in the village and teach you how these fertilizers are used. When the threshing was completed, the villagers, under Sivaraman's guidance, worked cooperatively on the program to give life back to the land. First, the green manure seeds were planted near the village pond, along the roads, wherever there was a patch of earth lying idle. But mainly the seeds were planted in a nursery, a lot of them, for much green manure would be needed. And there they were left to grow to seedlings. Next, Kandan and his neighbors dug compost pits at the edge of the village. Into them went decaying matter from the pond, rich in nitrogen, and leaves and dead grass which would rot and make humus. Refuse of all kinds. Litter was spread under tethered animals, and that litter, after it became saturated, would hasten the decomposition of the bulky matter in the pits. Cow dung was needed for fuel, but Kandan talked to his wife and for the first time carefully allotted half of the supply for use as compost. When the pits became full, they were covered with good, clean earth to keep flies from breeding there, and then were left to decompose until the time came to work the compost into the soil. When the seeds of the green manure plants had grown to seedlings, Sivaraman showed Kandan and his neighbors how to transplant them to the bunds bordering their paddy fields. Their work was going well. The crops would be better. But Sivaraman knew that the ravages of generations could not be mended in a season. or in 2 seasons with compost and green manuring. Health would return slowly to the worn-out soil. Sivaraman congratulated the villagers on their industry in preparing compost and green manure. But there is still another way to improve your crops. He showed the villagers a sample of ammonium sulfate, a chemical from the big new fertilizer plant at Sindri in the state of Bihar. This will be magic in your soil. The compost and green manure give strength to the land. The ammonium sulfate will give quick fertility. But we have no money to buy the fertilizers. Sivaraman explained that the Sindri plant is owned and operated by their government without profit, that they could borrow the fertilizer itself for use on the next paddy crop, and then repay the loan in cash after the harvest. I have seen the Sindri plants at Sivaraman. Each day it can produce 1,000 tons of the ammonium sulfate fertilizer. Each day enough fertilizer for hundreds of farms like yours, Kandan. Farms all over India. Farms growing all kinds of crops. To enrich your few acres, we would need the production of less than a minute from Sindri. The production of less than a minute. Sindri means much to our country in her battle for self-sufficiency. It is the biggest factory of its kind in all Asia, and the tons of fertilizer which this plant is manufacturing will grow tons of extra food for our people. At full capacity, the Sindri plant will produce 350,000 tons of ammonium sulfate each year. And soon, with American assistance under the new agreements with the Indian government, the capacity will be enlarged. You small farmers are the benefactors, continued Sivaraman. This great plant was built for your needs. Before Sindri, we Indians had to import almost all our commercial fertilizers. They were dear, too dear for the small farmer like you. But now you can afford to buy them. In simple terms, Sivaraman described for the villagers the difficult chemical processes in the making of ammonium sulfate. How coke in enormous quantities is freighted in from the nearby Damodar coalfields. Then how ammonia is taken off from gases generated from the burning coke. And he told them how gypsum is brought across the country from far-off Rajasthan, and how the sulfate is extracted from it, and how the final chemical processes make ammonium sulfate, the finished product which the farmers use on their land. To operate such a vast and complex plant requires the most advanced technical knowledge, said Sivaraman. There has been some engineering assistance from Americans and Britons, but Sindri otherwise is completely staffed by Indian personnel, men who have been carefully trained for the highest positions. And also described how the fertilizer is packed into jute bags and made ready for shipment to all parts of the country. Each bag, he said, would bring some small measure of prosperity to the farmer who used it. Just a few of those bags from Sindri, the production of less than a minute, will be needed on your land, Kandan. And just a few more of those bags will add fertility to all the village acres. This would be a good investment for your village, Sivaraman concluded. The men were pleased. They liked and trusted Sivaraman. Kandan was their spokesman. We shall accept the fertilizer as a loan, he said. In time, the green manure plants grew tall on the bunds of the village fields. They were ready now, and Sivaraman showed the farmers how the plants should be cut. And he showed them how to spread the cuttings on the surface of the flooded paddy fields, about 4,000 pounds of them to the acre. Next, Kandan and his neighbors removed the now rotted compost from the pits. This was a busy time. Everyone in the village helped prepare the soil for planting. The compost, too, was spread evenly over the fields. Then the green manure cuttings and the rich decayed matter of the compost pits were trampled into the earth. Here was the food, the nitrogen and the humus, which the famished soil needed. As they worked, Sivaraman explained to Kandan that this was only one way of using green manure, and only one of the many kinds of green manure. Here there was plenty of water, and the green cuttings could be worked directly into the soil. You are lucky, he said. In dry areas, the green manure first had to decay in compost pits before being applied to the land. And in many parts of India, the green manure seed is sown on the fields themselves and ploughed under between grain crops. Pressed into the wet earth, the green manure rotted rapidly. And a few days later, Kandan and his neighbors set out seedlings for their new paddy crop. The land was nourished and the growing paddy was nourished. Kandan's harvest became the best in his memory. The fertilizers, all of them, compost, green manure, ammonium sulfate, meant new life for the land belonging to the men of Kandan's village. And on the land their lives depended. Kandan's village is just one in many thousands. But the harvests of other villagers over the whole of India will be richer, as, working together with good men like Sivaraman, they learn improved methods of agriculture and fertilization under the Village Improvement Program. There will be more food for India, and their lives will be more prosperous, as the people of the land work to build a self-sufficient nation.